This is a brain stretcher by Tomblin on the Huns and barbarian invasions. Accurate and unbiased information on the Huns was scarce, since they were hated by the Romans and had a large part in the fall of Rome. But the Huns were bitter enemies with the Chinese and had camps near the Yellow River in the center of modern-day China. The Xiongnu fought with China in the 300s BC and were a fierce nomadic race, which leads many to believe that the Huns were the latter-day Xiongnu, since there is no factual evidence on the origins of the Huns. Huns were fierce, and at a young age were taught to ignore pain. Huns were nomadic, but before their migration they lived in Western Asia, around China and Mongolia. They migrated to the east, where there were Visigothic villages in front of them. The Visigoths were generally a peaceful tribe, and used throwing axes and swords in their earlier years. When the Huns migrated, possibly because of cold weather and they needed better pastures, moved east, and some of the Visigoths were in the way of the Huns, and were not prepared for an ambush, and they were decimated. The Huns fought well on horseback, and primarily used javelins, or light spears used for thrusting and throwing, composite bows, and arrows that were tipped with a sharpened bone. They were shot with deadly force and precision. While those were what were primarily used, Hunnic warriors also used longswords that were up to 4 feet long to swing while on horseback. If a horse was killed, a gladius or a short sword that was 25 to 32 inches long was used on foot, probably because the longsword didn't allow fast enough movement. After the devastation of a Visigothic village because of the Huns, the Visigoths sought out the protection of the Roman Empire, and they served as soldiers on the front lines. Since they became Roman soldiers, and they were given Roman weapons and armor, but soon after their migration, there was a famine in the Roman Empire, and the Visigoths were not given enough food. The Visigoths rebelled, and during the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, they lost nearly half of their tribe's soldiers. It was not in vain, though, because it was one of the worst Roman defeats in their history, and even the Emperor Valens was killed in a bloody conflict. The Visigoths and the Romans eventually made peace, but under the Roman Emperor Honorius and his anti-barbarian party, roughly 30,000 Gothic soldiers in the Roman army were massacred. Again and again the Visigoths were betrayed, and in 410 AD, under Alaric I, they sacked the city of Rome, killing an estimate of 15,000 Roman soldiers. After the death of Alaric, the Visigoths soon moved to Spain, where they stayed from the 5th to the 8th centuries AD. Around the time of the sack of Rome and the migration of the Visigoths to Spain, the Huns were under the leadership of Attila, invading Italy, and had been razing cities and villages. In about 450 AD, there was another famine, and Attila's devastation of cities and plains did not help. In 453 AD, on his own wedding night, Attila had died from a nosebleed. Attila's son took over, but after the defeat in the battle with the Gepids, the Huns seemed to disappear from existence. We do not know exactly why the Huns migrated, but we can come to the conclusion that their migration played a bigger part in the history of the world than they had ever anticipated. The migration of the Huns led to the migration of the Visigoths, and the migration of the Visigoths led to Rome being destroyed and looted. Rome was not the capital of the Roman Empire, as it was moved west to Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul, by the Emperor Constantine, but Rome was still a very important part of the Roman Empire, and its plundering was a factor in its crumbling.